All right, let's get to part two. In fact, before we do that, let's see some of the things we want to experience as well. This is a stored copy of an animation that just finished a little bit earlier, and we've got the ray tracer, the path tracer rendering. We got some waves, refraction, and the elevation map is sinking down. So the terrain, the image that it represents, is disappearing in the water. It's a little loop, 10, 30 seconds long, 13 seconds or so. And what came to that elevation map is, of course, a picture like this one, and there are many different ways to see it, right? So here is a smaller version that I actually used as the elevation map. I think the swap image might have, no, that one's gone already, but we may have used the inverse for that. So the question is, how do you get to something like this in the first place? Because if you take a photo, you might, well, the original is bigger, so let's go and recreate this. And I'm going to minimize the stored animation. So this photo again started from Pexel, same as we had earlier. And this time what I did is I didn't use that technique we saw in the earlier exercise, but I created something like this. And we then also experimented with some of the other techniques to extract edges. You can either try with edge detection. There's a couple of filters to do that, but it's usually going to be a little bit more sophisticated. There, under the convolve, there is embossing, there's edge detection, there's color edge detect. In fact, sometimes you use that on top of what you've already done to kind of further edge detect on top of that, right? Do some more. But let's see what how quickly we created something like that when we went from this picture into this one or this one. Actually, that is the same. So very quick, very easy. What we do is we do have a special filter. You load the picture and then you go to the filter, adjust, and there's a couple of new ones here. There's one called adaptive threshold. Now, before I explain that, I'm going to show just threshold. Right, so threshold is one where it's going to look through the entire image, and you can say I want some of it black, some of it white, nothing in between. So that itself can also be sometimes enough to do what you want. Right, so it's going to be where maybe you try that first, and depending on the look of the picture, depending on the details, you may just have what you need here. But there is another technique which is adaptive threshold. And the difference between the threshold and the adaptive threshold is that this one is adapting to different smaller pieces of the picture. So you have some extra block sizes, and you can make smaller pieces look for the threshold in itself. So you have a bit more refinement, a little bit more granularity as to where it's actually going to set that threshold. And so that gets you perhaps extra details in the eyes, around the nose, the lips, and so on. Whereas the single approach might lose things. Here, if you take the blocks a little bit too big, the block size too big, then it's getting closer to what you also see in the regular filter for threshold, right? So the adaptive threshold is one where you might find some really good ground for, let's say, doing this, for example, here, right, or something like this, 64 by 64, tiny little blocks throughout a picture, and each of the blocks being analyzed for the threshold. And so sometimes you want it more like this, so the entire hair region is dark, but sometimes you do want to show a little bit more detail. And nothing prevents you from doing both, right? You can certainly do, for example, you could do this one and then store it. There you go. And then you undo, and you go back to this with the same filter, adjust, adaptive threshold, and then this time maybe you change the value or you change the block size, and whatever it is you're doing, you get a slightly different result. Let's take this one, for example, and yeah, something like this. And you got this, so you have two pictures now, right? And maybe you want really a mix of the two. So you store this one, you have the other one, you have both of them, this one and this one. And maybe you want to combine the two. A simple way to combine them is simply click the other and then do an interactive undo. I click this one and then say, let's go back interactively. That's the blend between and after, right? You have this one has everything, this one has nothing of the change, and if you go somewhere in between, you have grayscales. You have something in between the two, a blended combination of them. There's a couple of other ways to do similar. You could put them in separate separate layers. In fact, let's experiment with that quickly. So I have in the main image, I have this one here. I'm going to add a second layer on top here that I'm going to use to load this one in. Now they are multiplying each other, so what's black is staying black, but you might have an interest in experimenting with different combinations. So here's where you could see perhaps one prevail, the light one, right? You could maybe do a round gray, you could do screen mode. There's so many different effects you can get with that. Some of them will reveal some additional edges. Right, you see, for instance, here along the edge of the outer side of the hair. So there's really a lot of experimenting to do here if you want to see something really wacky, really strange, different. And then don't forget that once you've done that, you can also flatten it, for example, like this, and then further do some more changes. For example, if you want to add to this, maybe a little bit of smoothing, maybe a little bit of blurring, but also some of the filters in the photographic category. There's some soft contrast improvement that will add a little bit of softness to that. You see that gray softness? And then if you do something like this, right now it's kind of granular and very blocky, but if you soften it like this and then add the threshold again, you're going to have a new, much nicer, smoother transition right here. Threshold. See how it's finding the middle ground or whatever the transition is that you're looking for. So you can get sort of softer, rounder regions with that. And of course, you can even go back to the adaptive threshold and do this thing on top of it once more. So combine them to even more sophisticated appearance. You could, for example, also do additional edge detection on that. So let's say we do under the convolution here, you do edge detect, and you'll see this. And then maybe you'll do some more combination with the photographic light diffusion this time. You could do a little bit of light diffusion, make sure it's not dark, but light diffusion, additive maybe, or screen mode. Let's do additive and increase this a little bit. It's not a lot of gain here. Let's see, default. I'm not seeing what I'm expecting here. I don't know why. I was hoping to see a little bit more impact on that light diffusion. It's very subtle. Let's go actually do blurring. That's another technique, right? If you want to make this jaggedy looking set of edges, you want to make them a little bit smoother, what you do, you start with a blurring, and it doesn't have to be Gaussian blur. There's plenty others, but box filter, simple blur, but Gaussian blur too. Any of these will typically allow you to add a little bit of a blurriness to it. Of course, that might look like it's turning grayish, and then maybe even black if it's all the way to too high a level of blurring. But the moment you then transition it back into the threshold, you're going to see that these formerly blocky lines are coming a little bit smoother. And of course, you can make them look like they are disconnected depending on where you set that threshold. Anyway, so that all started with the adaptive threshold, and I wanted to just show some of the possibilities here. If we load this original sized image, you have quite a number of possibilities here. There's some other filters that were used with that, and it all starts with the adaptive threshold. When you start from an image like this one and then run the adaptive threshold, maybe it turns into a Mona Lisa of sorts or not, and there's a lot of different things that you can do out of that line edge detection. With the technique shown in part 1, you can do something like this as well. And so now it's your turn. You can add other filters. You have some bristles look. Where is it here under the artistic effects? You have graphic pens, brush strokes, lots of different things you can do to make it even more mysterious. And there's some really interesting stippled appearance. Polka dots, right? And then maybe turn that into an elevation map. But that's for another one. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.